This is a story from so long ago that some details have grown fuzzy with time. But the fear I felt that day remains as vivid as ever. I was in the 4th grade, and it was the last day of school. For our elementary school, 4th grade was the final year where kids needed to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home alone. My mom always picked me up on the last day, and this year was no exception. My best friend, Dennis, and I had planned a little celebration for the day, just the two of us hanging out. We weren't in the same class that year, so he was being dismissed from a different hallway. When the final bell rang, I followed my classmates in a single-file line to the designated pickup spot, where our teacher, Miss Blue, kept an eye on us until our rides arrived. I stood at the curb, scanning the sea of adults for Dennis's dad. That's when I heard my name. "Tommy? Tommy?" I turned to see a man waving at me as he approached. He looked a little disheveled, wearing a loose shirt and jeans. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was here to pick me up. I hesitated. Something about him felt off. But he spoke quickly, almost nervously, explaining that Dennis's dad got tied up at work and couldn't make it. I looked back at Miss Blue and told her, "I'm being picked up." She asked who, and I pointed to the man. He gave her a big, cheerful wave, and without a second thought, Miss Blue dismissed me. As I followed him through the crowd, something about the way he moved struck me as strange. He walked fast, too fast, and talked just as quickly. His words spilled out in a jittery mess, bouncing from one topic to another. I struggled to keep up with him, my backpack weighing me down. When we reached his car, a dark red hatchback, I started to feel uneasy. I glanced around, half expecting to see Dennis running up to join us, but the man quickly ushered me inside. As he started the car, I asked, "Where's Dennis?" "Oh, he's already at the house," he said without missing a beat, flashing me a toothy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Something was wrong. I knew it. But I was a shy kid, not the type to confront adults, especially ones I didn't know. I stayed quiet, hoping that maybe I was just overthinking. We drove for what felt like an eternity. I didn't recognize the streets or houses. Nothing looked familiar. The man kept talking, asking me about school, sports, anything to fill the silence. I answered in short, mumbled replies, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, we pulled up to a house. It looked normal enough from the outside, modest with a neat little yard. But when he led me inside, the atmosphere shifted. The house was dark. All the curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a dim lamp in the corner of the living room. The air felt heavy, suffocating. "Where's Dennis?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated this time, his jittery energy faltering. He's downstairs, playing video games. Wait here." He disappeared into another room, and I heard the creak of a door, followed by the sound of footsteps descending into a basement. Panic set in. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the front door was locked, deadbolted from the inside. I felt trapped. My eyes darted around the room until I spotted a phone mounted on the wall in the kitchen. Quietly, I crept over and picked up the receiver. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. When the operator answered, I whispered, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." They assured me help was on the way, but I didn't stay on the line. I tucked the phone under a towel on the counter and hurried back to where the man had left me, just as I heard his footsteps coming back up the stairs. "Tommy," he called. "Come down. Dennis is waiting." I didn't move. He called my name again, his voice sharper this time. Then the basement door creaked open, and he stepped out, staring at me with a look that made my blood run cold. "Why are you standing there?" he asked, his tone tense. "I want to go home," I stammered. The fake friendliness drained from his face, replaced by something darker. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with a grip that made me cry out. "Behave," he hissed, "and I'll let you go." I didn't fight him as he dragged me toward the basement. The door slammed shut behind us, and I heard the lock click. The basement was worse than I imagined. Unfinished concrete floors, a single exposed light bulb casting a sickly yellow glow, and a faint musty smell that made me nauseous. It was cold, empty, and utterly lifeless, except for one lone support beam in the center of the room. I sat there, frozen in fear, listening to his heavy footsteps pacing upstairs. Every creak, every movement sent shivers down my spine. Then I heard it, the doorbell. It rang 3 times, followed by loud, urgent banging. I held my breath as the man's footsteps stopped. The banging grew louder, accompanied by muffled shouting. Then came the sound of the front door being forced open. I screamed, banging on the basement door as loud as I could. Seconds later, it flew open, and a police officer grabbed me, pulling me into safety. The man was arrested on the spot, his hands cuffed behind his back. I never saw him again, but the memory of that day has haunted me ever since. To this day, I don't know how he knew what I looked like or how he managed to trick my teacher. All I know is that if I hadn't called 911, I might not be here to tell this story. This happened 17 years ago, and sometimes I wonder if the man from that day is still out there, or worse, free. It was junior year of high school, and the last day of school was supposed to be one of celebration and fun, but that day wasn't like any other. It was stormy, dark, and moody, as if the weather itself was warning us. Most students either skipped school entirely or left early after lunch. My friends and I decided to be part of the latter. Originally, a bunch of us planned to hit the beach to kick off summer break, but the storm killed that idea. So, my smaller group of 4, me, Eddie, Mark, and Sarah, decided to do something more daring. There was an abandoned elementary school in town that had been closed for over a decade. The place was scheduled for demolition by the end of the year, and we figured it would be our last chance to explore it. The idea of sneaking into a crumbling, forgotten school on a stormy day, it sounded thrilling. We piled into Eddie's car and drove through the rain-soaked streets to the school. The building sat eerily in the middle of a quiet neighborhood, its faded brick walls and shattered windows giving it a haunted, lifeless appearance. Eddie parked in the back lot, hidden by overgrown bushes and the shadows of the looming structure. The place wasn't boarded up, just locked. But Eddie came prepared. He grabbed a baseball bat from his trunk and marched to one of the windows near the back entrance. With a few hard swings, the glass shattered, the sound cracking through the rainy air like a gunshot. Nervously, we laughed, glancing over the fences at the nearby houses, half expecting someone to come outside. No one did. Eddie cleared the jagged edges of glass with the bat and waved us over. One by one, we climbed through the broken window into what looked like an old classroom. The air inside was stale and heavy, carrying the faint scent of mold and decay. Desks sat in neat rows, untouched by human hands for years. Decorations still clung to the walls, faded posters of multiplication tables and cheerful cartoon animals, now warped and curling at the edges. The room was frozen in time, a ghostly reminder of what it once was. The storm raged outside, the sound of rain hammering against the roof and the occasional crack of thunder echoing through the empty halls. The power had long been cut, so we relied on the flashlights from our phones to navigate. We wandered the hallways, peeking into classrooms, each one nearly identical to the last. Desks, chairs, and remnants of forgotten school days. The atmosphere was surreal, almost dreamlike. Then we heard it, a sound. It echoed down the hallway, a faint noise like the creak of a door or a shuffle of movement. We froze, turning off our flashlights instinctively. In the brief flash of lightning that lit up the windows, we glanced at each other, eyes wide with silent questions. "What was that?" Mark whispered. We stood still for a moment, waiting, but the sound didn't come again. Nervous laughter broke the tension, and we convinced ourselves it was nothing. Maybe just the building settling or the wind blowing something over. We kept moving, our wet shoes squeaking on the old linoleum floors. The sound echoed loudly in the empty halls, making sneaking around impossible. As we rounded a corner, I turned back, something pulling my attention to the hallway behind us. In the dim light, I saw it, a shape protruding slightly from one of the doorways, like someone or something peeking out. "Guys, look," I whispered, pointing. The others turned, shining their phone flashlights down the hall. As the beams of light landed on the doorway, the shape retracted, pulled back into the room as if it had never been there. We all gasped, muttering a collective, "Oh shit." Without hesitation, we ran, our footsteps pounding against the floor as we tore down the intersecting hallway. We didn't stop until we were far away, our breaths coming in heavy pants. We found ourselves in what appeared to be the kindergarten wing. The tiny chairs and colorful murals on the walls did little to comfort us. Then we heard it again, a sound, closer this time. We panicked, darting into the nearest classroom and shutting the door behind us. Inside, the air felt even heavier. We turned off our lights and sat in the dark, listening to the rain pounding against the building and the occasional rumble of thunder. Then, the sound of the door handle turning. It clicked, and the door slowly creaked open. We held our breaths, paralyzed by fear, as the door swung fully open. The hallway beyond was almost pitch black, illuminated only by faint flashes of lightning from the windows. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, slowly, a shape appeared, a head peeking around the corner of the doorway. It wasn't just a trick of the shadows. We all saw it. The figure didn't move. It stayed there, motionless, just watching us. "Who the hell is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Eddie, always the bold one, grabbed a broken chair leg lying nearby and stepped toward the doorway. "Hey, who's there?" he shouted. The head disappeared, retreating back into the darkness of the hall. Eddie turned back to us, visibly shaken. "We're getting out of here, now." We filed out of the classroom, sticking close together as we crept back toward the way we came. The rain was louder now, pounding on the roof like a drum beat. Every hallway felt longer, darker, more suffocating. Then from somewhere behind us we heard footsteps. They weren't rushed or panicked. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy, echoing through the empty halls. We started to run. The sound of footsteps quickened, matching our pace. My heart was in my throat as we reached the classroom with the broken window. Eddie climbed through first, holding the window frame steady for the rest of us. As I climbed out, I glanced back down the hallway. The figure was there, standing just at the edge of the flashlight beam. It was a man, tall, thin, and unnervingly still. He didn't chase us. He just stood there, watching, as I climbed out of the window and tumbled into the rain-soaked grass. Eddie floored it out of the parking lot, and we didn't stop driving until we were back at Mark's house. None of us spoke for a while. The silence in the car, broken only by our ragged breathing and the sound of rain pelting the windows. We never told anyone what happened that day. Not our parents, Not our teachers, not even our other friends. But every now and then I'll think about that man, the way he just stood there, watching us. I wonder if he still goes back to that school, and I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run. It all started on a stormy day in junior year, when my friends and I decided to explore the abandoned elementary school before it was torn down. What we experienced there would haunt me forever. The building was a crumbling shell of its former self, with shattered windows and faded murals. The storm outside only heightened the tension as we wandered the empty hallways, our footsteps echoing loudly against the old linoleum floors. At first, it was just a creepy adventure, until we saw it. Lightning lit up the hallway, and for a split second, we saw someone, or something, peering into the classroom we were in. It was a head, partially visible around the doorway, staring directly at us. I panicked and started apologizing out loud, trying to defuse whatever we'd stumbled into. "We're leaving, we're sorry," I said. But the figure didn't move. It stayed completely still, almost lifeless, just watching. Eddie, always the bold one, asked, "Do you work here?" No response. The silence was suffocating. Eddie, clearly unnerved, handed me the baseball bat he'd brought and began fumbling with one of the windows. He struggled to unlock it, sliding it open just enough to crawl through. He went first, followed by Mark and Sarah. I was the last to leave. Before crawling out, I made the mistake of looking back. The figure was still there, just a shadowy head peering around the door frame, unmoving. My heart pounded as I scrambled through the window, half expecting to feel cold hands grabbing my legs. Once I was out, I sprinted to catch up with my friends, who were already halfway to Eddie's car. We drove off into the storm, leaving the school behind us. None of us ever talked about what happened that day, and the building was demolished later that year. It's a park now, but I'll never walk through it without remembering the lifeless figure in the doorway, just staring. Fast forward a few years to my freshman year of college, and I found myself dealing with something just as chilling, but far more personal. I was taking a challenging chemistry class, and it was clear from the start that I was struggling. Luckily, I was seated next to Zach, an awkward guy who seemed to thrive academically. Zach was 5 feet 8 inches, a little overweight, with an unfortunate patchy beard. He gave off strong Reddit moderator vibes, but he knew his stuff, and I needed the help. Over time, Zach and I developed a cordial rapport. He noticed how much I struggled in class and started offering to help. Eventually, he even let me cheat off him on tests and offered to do my homework. I never got any romantic vibes from him. He seemed far too socially awkward to even attempt flirting. But when he asked for my number to send me homework stuff, I didn't hesitate to give it to him. Zach's help carried me through the semester, and on the last day of class, he dropped a bombshell. He asked me out on a date. I wasn't interested, physically or otherwise, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings after everything he'd done for me. So, I lied. I told him I was going to Miami for a few weeks and wouldn't be around. But Zach wasn't deterred. He immediately asked, "What about when you get back?" Thinking he'd lose interest by then, I vaguely said, "Yeah, maybe." His response was a cringy nod and a muttered, "Cool." After class, I left quickly, eager to put some distance between us. That night, while out with my friends, I told them about Zach. We laughed it off, joking about how I should go on a pity date with him, but I didn't take it seriously. Then Zach texted me, "When are you leaving for Miami?" I ignored it at first, but the next morning I woke up to follow-up messages. One had a string of question marks, and the other said, "You're going to ignore me now that you don't need me anymore, right?" I replied, "Sorry, I've been busy packing. I'm leaving today." His response was almost immediate. "Okay." That night, while out again with my friends, I got another text from Zach. "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." My blood ran cold. How did he know? I replied cautiously. "What do you mean?" He answered, "Nothing. Forget it. I just don't like liars." I was terrified. I scanned the bar, convinced he was watching me, but I didn't see him. My friends told me to block him, but I decided to just stop replying. Hours later, I got home, exhausted, and was taking off my shoes when I heard a knock at the door. It was 1 a.m. I froze and called out, "Who is it?" A familiar voice answered, "It's me, Zach." Panic set in. I yelled through the door, "Leave! My dad's here, and he'll kick your ass." Thankfully, that worked. Zach left without another word. But the terror wasn't over. At 3 a.m., I received a long, rambling text from him. "I feel so hurt and betrayed. After all I've done for you, you lied to me. I thought we had chemistry, no pun intended. You looked at me in class. I know you felt it too. I'm not asking for much, just one date. I could be the perfect boyfriend, but you're throwing it away. If you want, I can come back, and we can talk in person. I'm only offering this once." I was disgusted. I forwarded the text to everyone I knew, including my dad, who immediately sent Zach a scathing reply and tried calling him multiple times. Zach never answered. The next day, I went to the police and showed them everything. They tried contacting Zach, but he vanished, stopped attending classes, ignored calls, disappeared from social media. I never saw or heard from Zach again, but to this day, the thought of him still sends chills down my spine.